Wonderful. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We are absolutely thrilled to have you join us on our webinar today. I hope you learn a lot of helpful, valuable information. My name is Missy Dalloway, and I am the president and CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation, Eastern Pennsylvania. Our mission at the foundation is to stop seizures and SUDEP, find a cure, and overcome the challenges created by epilepsy through efforts including education, advocacy, and research to accelerate ideas into therapies. What that means is that we are here to serve and support the 110,000 people living with epilepsy in Eastern Pennsylvania. Our goal is to empower and improve the lives of people affected by epilepsy and help overcome the challenges associated with the disorder. We do this by offering a wide range of free educational programs and support services, such as our monthly support group meetings, educational conferences, trainings, and webinars, such as this one you're joining us on today. We also offer one-on-one consultations, retreat programs and camps, and a wide range of community events. If you would like to get connected to us and learn more about our free and locally provided support services and programs, please do not hesitate to contact us at efepa@efepa.org. Now, joining me on today's webinar, we have the EFEPA's own program director, Rena Lachlan, who you'll hear more from later on. Our expert speakers, Dr. Ash Sharan, neurosurgeon at Thomas Jefferson University Hospitals, as well as Dr. Christopher Skidmore, neurologist and epilepsy specialist at Thomas Jefferson University Hospitals. We also have our partners from NeuroPace, Heidi Glasser and Emily Pigeon, as well as John, a patient advocate who has personally benefited from the RNS system. So without further ado, I'd love to get things kicked off, and I am going to pass the mic to Dr. Chris Skidmore to get things started today. Thank you so much again for joining.
Good afternoon, everyone. And so my name is Chris Skidmore. I'm one of the epilepsy specialists at Thomas Jefferson University, and I want to thank you for your attention and participating today. Just a couple of quick slides, and then we'll have John talk about his experience with RNS and then kind of make ourselves available to answer questions. And I don't need to tell this group that epilepsy is a very, very common condition, and there's approximately 2.5 to 3 million people in the United States with epilepsy. And unfortunately, for most individuals, 2 out of every 3 individuals, their epilepsy can be controlled with medication. But unfortunately, about 1 out of every 3 individuals, they continue to have seizures despite kind of seizure medication. And so that's where we're always looking for options and alternatives to medical treatment as a means of trying to gain seizure control. Next slide. And so remember that epilepsy is a disorder. It's a disorder of abnormal electricity in the brain. So our brains are supercomputers, and they communicate by sending electrical signals. And a seizure occurs when there's abnormal electrical discharge, almost like a short circuit, that basically disrupts the normal electrical activity of the brain and generates the symptoms of a seizure. Next slide. And this is just going back to the fact of kind of looking at, if you take people who are dealing with epilepsy and you treat them with an appropriate medication, approximately 47% of people are controlled with that first medication, meaning no seizures, tolerating the medication and doing well. If for some reason they either have seizures or they don't tolerate it and you go on to a next seizure medication, you pick up about another 13% of individuals. But unfortunately, by the time you get to your 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th, 12th drug, the chance of gaining long-term seizure freedom is less than 5%. And that always needs to be our goal. If we can achieve it, is seizure freedom, because we know if we can make you seizure free, we basically can reduce your risk of having complications from your seizures and also reduce the risk of SUDEP, which is sudden unexplained death in epilepsy. And so what we're talking today about is those individuals, the roughly 1/3 of people that unfortunately are not controlled with medications. Next slide.
So I'll jump in over there, and I think Dr. Skidmore and I can go back and forth. When somebody is, we call it drug-resistant epilepsy, when the medicines are not responding to you, it actually sets off a whole different pathway of thinking. That what do we do next? And that is where we start working together as a team. And before you see me as a surgeon, there's a whole process. We order very particular types of MRI. We often get a PET scan. We bring you into the hospital for prolonged monitoring because we're trying to understand what's happening with this electrical system in your head and why is that going awry. And we're hoping to figure out what that problem is. Can it be fixed? Can it be modulated or changed? And today we're going to talk about the patients who it cannot be, that bad circuit cannot be removed. And I give this slide really just to give people an idea about how much has changed. And this, I think people aren't so aware of. The size of a neuron is 60 microns. It's about just smaller than a strand of hair. And the question I like to ask the audience, and I don't expect anybody to answer it, is does anybody know how big are the transistors or the chips? How many transistors are on this little cell phone? A transistor is about 10,000 times smaller today than a neuron. And why I make that point is that today, the technology that we have available has far surpassed what we have actually in our brain in a lot of little ways. And we're coming to the point where we're talking about almost inserting a chip into the brain that can change the way epilepsy works. And so that's why I bring that. And then the other thing that I want to leave everybody who's listening to this today is that a lot has changed. There were massive amounts of discoveries that happened in the last 50 years. The picture on the very left is called a pneumoencephalography. People used to inject air inside the head to see what the brain looked like. Then in 1979, the Nobel Prize was awarded for people to get a test called a CAT scan, which I think everybody with epilepsy is aware of. And the image all the way on the right in 2003 was awarded the Nobel Prize again for an MRI. So a lot has actually changed, and we can see problems inside the brain more particularly than we were ever able to do before. And so technology got better, imaging got better. And there's a very third improvement that's happened in the last 10 years. And we now actually have very complicated robots in the operating room that are also assisting with surgery. And all these technologies today are being used for patients with epilepsy, basically. And so the idea is, can we figure out where is the epilepsy coming from in the brain? And then can we do something to fix it or change it or reroute the circuit? So some patients who have multiple points in the brain where the seizures may be coming from are candidates for this new therapy that's been FDA approved now for, I don't remember exactly, and some of our panelists can add to it, but I think probably 5 to 7 years. Why my memory fails me on that is we were involved in the pre-FDA studies. So we've been actually implanting this chip, and you can see that over here in the corner, is basically a equivalent to what everybody's familiar with is a cardiac defibrillator. So this actual device gets implanted in the skull, and you can see it down here. This actually continuously monitors the brain activity through these wires that are implanted in the brain. It has the ability to detect specific patterns of seizures, which eventually gets programmed, and then is automatically programmed to give stimulation to try to reduce the number of seizures somebody's having inside their head, right? I'll give it back to you, Chris. So the surgery, maybe I'll talk about it for one more second before I hand it off. So it's actually a reasonably complicated surgery, and Dr. Skidmore and myself are here as a team because it requires the neurologist and neurosurgeon to sort of work together, identify what might be the optimum location to trap the seizure between these two different wires. And it requires you to have this system implanted with the wires inside the brain and the battery within the skull. And then you go through healing, and we can talk about it if people have questions about the recovery process. And then once you're healed, you go back to Dr. Skidmore or the neurologist, and then they have to figure out the different patterns of your seizures, because now we can record it with incredibly high fidelity because we have the recording sensors on the brain. And then that's when the next phase of this treatment starts.
Yeah, and so after surgery, after you've kind of healed up and recover, typically come back to us about 4 to 6 weeks afterwards. And we're actually waiting for the brain to actually have a seizure because the device is actually recording the electrical activity from the time of the surgery with some very basic settings that we set it at the time of surgery. And then we're waiting for a seizure because this device is unique in the sense that we actually program the device to your specific seizure pattern that's unique to your brain. And so we actually have to wait for some seizures to happen and then record that information and then program this device to react when it sees your unique seizure pattern. And so the way we do that is you actually go home from the hospital with a laptop and you can actually put a wand over where the device is in your skull and you're actually able to download information onto that computer, that laptop computer at home, and then connect that to the internet. And then I can actually see the information by logging in on the internet. And then we can verify that we're getting good information, that we're capturing the seizures that we need to see. And then you come into the office and we actually start programming. And there's lots of different ways. So we can only put in really 2 electrodes that are connected to the device. It can either be what's called a strip electrode that's lying on the surface of the brain, or more like a needle electrode with like individual contacts on it that's actually in the brain itself. And you can do any combination that you'd like. And then basically you come into the office. So next slide. And here on the right-hand side, these 2 panels, what you're actually seeing is the electrical activity being recorded from this individual's brain. And so each of those electrodes has 4 contacts and we connect 2 contacts together. So this might be contact 1 and 2. This is contact 3 and 4 on maybe say the A electrode. And on the B electrode, this is contact 1 and 2, and this is 3 and 4. And we're basically are now programming the device to detect when it sees a seizure. And so often seizures can be represented here by this very low voltage, very dark line here. This actually can be a seizure onset, and as it is here, and then it starts to have this increased electrical activity that you can then see spread from, let's say, the B contacts over to the A contacts. And if we kept on looking, it might generate into a seizure. And so we're trying to set the device to detect this. And by adjusting it, which we did here, now you can see we're detecting that change very early on, and then providing an electrical stimulation, which is abbreviated TR here for treatment, where then you can shut down that abnormal electrical discharge. And so in this patient, that same discharge that we saw here, now we program the device to detect it down on the 3rd line and then to give the treatment. And so we can set very unique parameters and different stimulation thresholds for the different electrodes that we have in your brain. Next slide. And what we've learned, not only from this trial, so this trial was put through a very rigorous, what we call double-blinded trial. So initially in the trial, the patients, half the patients had the device on and half the patients had the device off for the first 3 months of the trial. And then after that, everyone had it on. And then they continued to follow everyone. And now there's data out as far as 7 years. So at the end of the trial, there was an approximate 35% reduction in seizures at the end of the trial period. And then if you follow all the patients out, now out to about 7 years, it achieves about a 70% median reduction, and also what's called a responder rate. So the responder rate is what % of patients had their seizures cut in half. So if you had 10 seizures a month, did you go down to 4 seizures a month? That would be a responder. And so you had a 50% reduction in your average seizures. And so it's been shown not only to work in a very short time window of 3 months, but now what we know from both this stimulator as well as other stimulators is that it actually increases its effectiveness over time. And so the longer it's implanted, as we learn more and customize it and adjust the settings, we seem to get a benefit over time. Next slide.
So this I'm just sharing with you, like I mentioned, that there's sort of a team approach that goes into understanding what we do for epilepsy. Mike Sperling is the head of the program, and we call ourselves the Jefferson Comprehensive Epilepsy Center. And not only do we have teams of neurologists, neurosurgeons, we actually work hand in hand with neuroradiologists, neuropsychologists, EEG technicians, because you can imagine the complexity of getting the wire in the right spot, getting the right device for you, getting the system programmed and calibrated for you. And so the idea is that we take this, what's called a multidisciplinary approach to patient care. And so for patients who are becoming resistant to drugs or 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different medicines that you haven't tried and if they don't work, the question is what else is possible? And so centers like ours, we're classified as a phase 4 epilepsy center, which means that we have the ability to offer many treatments that you might not get in the community. So our intention was just to share an experience, a treatment that we think actually has really impact on patient care and life. And we were fortunate enough to have one of our patients join us today. And so I think maybe we can introduce Mr. Emer next. You want to introduce?
Hello.
Oh, hi. Hey, John.
Hi, how are you, sir?
Excellent.
So John, why don't you just, I guess, start out by just telling them kind of a little bit about yourself and kind of maybe the steps kind of leading up towards getting the RNS implanted?
Yes, sir. I had a malignant tumor in the back of my head removed back in 2006. I was 35 years old. Prior to that, I had never had a seizure in my life. I had some post-surgical problems shortly thereafter and began having seizures. And I believe at some point I was diagnosed with epilepsy. In the beginning, my seizures were simple. They were focal, in my opinion. I would get the aura with the weird taste or the smell, goosebumps, or that sense of deja vu. They lasted for a couple of seconds, under a minute, and they would go away. But over the years, they got a little bit more tiresome, I guess is the word I'm going to use. They were developing into complex partials. I would lose awareness of my surroundings, and these were more debilitating than the first ones. And they affected my life in a more negative fashion, of course. They would drain me and I would feel exhausted for the rest of the day. At some point during those years, I was unable to drive for 6 months, and I had to be seizure-free for a certain amount of time, and for the doctors to stand up on my behalf to be able to drive again. I had a couple of visits to the emergency room or hospital. Over those years, I had had numerous drugs. I think it was 12, 13, and combinations in various dosages, usually on the highest strength. And I think it was 12 or 13. Currently, I only take 3. So down from 12 to 13, down to 3. That's a huge step. Some of the meds that I was on back then worked a little and then stopped. They caused some side effects that were not very becoming to my personality. I was very tired. I was irritable and aggressive, and the side effects did not outweigh what they could do for my epilepsy, in my opinion. And I would have, to my knowledge, my documentation, anywhere to 50 to 70 seizures a month. So when I learned about the refractory surgery, it became apparent that the medications and the combinations weren't working. And working with the people at Jefferson, Dr. Skidmore, Dr. Evans, and Dr. Sharan, I decided to go with the non-invasive testing. Anything, doctor, or you want me to just keep going, sir?
Go on. How did you, when surgery, did you seek out the idea that surgery was an option, or how did you get to the next step? Because you had other surgeries too.
Right. Well, the initial surgery to remove the tumor, and then the leads that were placed all over my head, and then I guess and Dr. Skidmore, correct me if I'm wrong, that area that eventually I had the surgery, was identified as a problematic area. Correct, sir?
Correct. You had a first stage called an intracranial EEG, where we basically placed a bunch of electrodes in the brain to try to more precisely map out exactly where the seizures were coming from. But unfortunately, some of the areas where the seizures were coming from were kind of vital to language, were really close to language function, and also very close to some of the major vision centers.
Right.
Yep.
So the decision based upon the information that you provided me, doctor, that was all that could be done for me at the time. So we had to stop there, and I was appreciative of that. The lobotomy to that scar tissue area was done, and I wanted to be seizure free as possible. So I'm going based upon the questions that I was provided. The medication side effects, the partial lobotomy, the persistent seizures, and the non-invasive testing. And I learned about the FDA approval for the NeuroPace. So I sat down with my family, sat down with my wife, and looked at all the information I had written down, and I decided to go forth with the NeuroPace surgery. I'd had a couple surgeries already done, so it was pretty much an easy decision.
Now, that's an interesting point, John, because I can imagine the disappointment after you had the scar removed and you continued to seize, and we discovered that there were parts in your brain that were critical. I mean, how did you feel that that it might not be easily cured?
Well, I didn't really have anything else to lose. I mean, the surgery that Dr. Evans did, Dr. Skidmore on this side, they did everything they could without affecting my vision and my speech. So they stopped and did the best they could there, but moving forward from that point, I was still having seizures. So it was as controlled as possible on the medications, and I really wanted my life back. Yeah. And there was no other surgery that could be done that was identified until the NeuroPace became, until I was made aware of the NeuroPace and it was FDA approved.
Now, how did you feel about this idea of having a chip on your skull?
Even though there were no other surgeries available to me, I was a little bit nervous because it was just out of clinical trials. It was cutting edge. It was recently FDA approved. I discussed it with my insurance company, but I was concerned about the implant of a device rather than another resective procedure that could help me. That was not the case. That had already been done. So surgery itself took many hours afterwards. It took me some time to recover, but balancing that out with living with the epilepsy, with all the meds I was on, it was I shouldn't say this, it was a no-brainer. That's just a point of phrase. To point of phrase. It really wasn't that tough. My family said, you have to. Dr. Skidmore, Dr. Evans, and you, doctor, said, these are your two choices, so make the call.
Right. How difficult was that surgery to go through it again?
To go through it again, after I needed to get the RNS replaced just for the newer device, that was...
I'm talking about just to go through the RNS implantation. Was that a difficult surgery?
Yeah, after the RNS implantation, the recovery, I was in the hospital for a few days, really not long, not any longer than the other surgeries. But the day I came home from the hospital, or shortly thereafter, I had another seizure that landed me back in the hospital. But the way I look at it is my brain had had enough surgeries, scar tissue, and to coin a phrase, and I'm not a doctor, it wasn't playing nicely in the sand. And it didn't appreciate my skull being opened again. So I came back home I was in the hospital for about a week, and I came back home, and it took some time to recover. You know, I had some little bit of language and remembering things, but I had some people come to the house and help me. But everything came back to me, and I was back to myself after, I don't know, 1 or 2 weeks. I've had some bad headaches. I have a very small ringing in my right ear, where this is where the device is. And that was, I asked Dr. Skidmore about it, and you, and that's where the device is. Would I trade it off? No, not in a New York minute. I'll keep the device. I'll live with this. I'd much rather live with where I am now than go back to pre-NeuroPace life. It's that simple. And I'll wrap this up, and I'll let the doctors get back. I can't feel the stimulation. I don't know when it goes off. I download the data every 2 days during the week, and I use an app on my phone. So every time I feel one of the sensations, I put it in my phone and I send that to Dr. Skidmore's office. And then when I learn and visit him, and I'll make about 12 entries a month. And then when I talk to Dr. Skidmore and download the information, the difference in the two is astronomical. I feel about 12 simple partials a month. And Dr. Skidmore will tell me, the people from RNS will tell me that the device goes off, I don't know, almost 2,000 times a day. So I don't, you'd need a calculator to figure out the difference between what I feel and how often this device is going off. Initially, I was going to see Dr. Skidmore and the people from NeuroPace, 1 or 2 months. Now it's 6 months. And how's my life been changed since RNS? My family worrisome about my next seizure is greatly reduced. The severity of my seizures has decreased only to the focal awareness seizures. That's it. Knock wood. Mm-hmm. I think my last complex seizure was over 3 years ago, and I don't remember the last time I had to take my rescue meds. I'm still on 3 meds, but that's because I am who I am. I don't believe I would be where I am right now without the RNS. I still have the seizures, but to a less degree, and they don't control my life. I do. I was able to retire from my employer after 25 years. I can drive, have another job, and that's pretty much, if I knew about the RNS when it became available, I wouldn't have pondered it and decided and kicked it around as long as I did. I would have been the first in line. It's that simple. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you for sharing, John.
Okay, sir. My pleasure.
Emily, you're muted.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, John, for sharing. And thank you, Dr. Sharan and Dr. Skidmore, for giving us all this information. We'd like to open this final portion of today up to Q&A from all the audience. If you joined us on Zoom, there's a Q&A box on the bottom of your screen that you can just type in your question. Or if you joined us on the Facebook Live, you can add any of your questions into the comment section. So actually,
there was one question already about the app that John's using to track his seizures. And there is an app that NeuroPace preferred at one point. I would say the most important thing is just track your seizures. It doesn't matter how, we just want you to make sure you're tracking them accurately. So if it's convenient to have an app on your phone, great. If you like to use a paper calendar at home, as long as you're tracking seizures, because John, you've had your device implanted for a long time, and it's kind of hard sometimes for us to remember, especially if you're only coming every 6 months, how many seizures did you have? And, so it's nice to be able to track them. So whatever way works for you, whether it's low tech or high tech, it's fine to track it whatever way you want.
Exactly. Another question that came in specifically about the RNS system, maybe this is best for Dr. Skidmore. Can someone do anything if they feel a seizure coming on? Amy said she remembers the VNS has a magnet. Is there anything like that with the RNS?
So there is nothing equivalent to the magnet for the VNS. So the vagus nerve stimulator is a different nerve stimulator. And when you swipe the magnet across that device, it actually turns it on, because that device, it turns on and off at a set frequency. And then if it happens to be in the off period when you're about to have a seizure, you can swipe the magnet across it and put it into the on mode. The RNS device is trained to turn on automatically at the beginning of a seizure. Now, there is a magnet with the RNS device, but it's actually used differently. So the RNS magnet is used when you have a seizure to swipe across it, and that tells the device that that's really an important piece of EEG information, because that's how we program the devices, by looking at your seizures. And so it's a way to make sure that then when you download it to the laptop, that's identified for us, so we know that that was a special one. So we usually tell people to swipe when they have their clinical seizures, so we know that was the EEG we really need to pay attention to.
Exactly. And Mary also asked, how do you know who's a candidate for the RNS system, the VNS, or resection?
Ash, you want to take that, or?
Yeah, so it's a great question. If you can actually do a safe resection without causing damage to the tissue near it where the seizures are coming from, the resection is almost always the preferred approach. Because if you can remove that bad scar tissue or the start of the seizure area, you're going to get more bang for your buck. You know, in a way to say it is, you're going to have the largest reduction of the seizures. If that cannot be done, like in John's case also, you know, when there were parts of the brain that you'd cause problems with vision or speech, that's not acceptable. And so that's when you think about RNS and VNS. And if you think about it, VNS is sending electrical signal back in the neck, and RNS is doing it right at the source. So if you look at one-to-one data, it also pans out that if you can do it at the source, and if there's only one or two spots, because right now the technology only has 2 points that it can work through, then RNS might be the preferred treatment. For, let's say somebody has 4 or 5, 6 different spots that you can't target, then the VNS might be a better option. So I think it's case dependent, but it's a little bit like that.
Yeah. And how often does the RNS battery need to be changed?
So today that answer has changed. When the device first came out, it was as early as 3 years and as long as 5 years. You know, we didn't know the optimum settings and how to optimize the programming. And so patients were getting battery changes more frequently. Since then, the technology has also seen, you know, RNS 2.0. There's probably a different name for it, but the battery is now MRI compatible, which it wasn't before. And the new battery is they tell us is gonna last 7 to 8 years. So I don't think we've had the new battery for that long, but it's definitely an improvement. And then John can talk about his experience for the battery replacement, but the battery is implanted in the skull. So you have to actually open the skin on top of the battery. You don't have to open the whole incision, because all you gotta do is take the battery out, you know, unscrew the connection, rewire it, and push it back in. So it's a much easier operation.
Yeah. And John, someone actually asked, what was your experience like when you had the battery replaced?
Oh, it was in and out, same day procedure. It was nothing, as Dr. Sharan just said, it was explained to me, incision was made, device was taken out in the layman term, and the new one was put in and put properly into place. And then I was sewn right back up and home in time for coffee.
And I'd like to just also add to that, you know, when we talk about replacing the battery, it's actually replacing the device. It's actually the entire device. So when you get your battery, quote unquote, replaced, you're actually getting a brand new device with all the latest technology. So in addition to the new device, when John had his replaced being a longer battery, it actually also had more memory storage. So the original device could store 3 or 4 of those EEG recordings. And now the newer device can store anywhere from 6 to 8, depending on how we set it, of those EEG recordings. So the value of also getting the battery replaced is you're actually getting a brand new device with all the brand new and latest electronics as well.
Exactly. And we have a few questions come in about new technology coming out by NeuroPace. So I'll take that question and just let everyone know that NeuroPace is constantly innovating and constantly coming up with new ideas as to where the RNS system will go in the future. And as soon as any of that information is available, we will let everybody know.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to ask Dr. Skidmore, what exactly sets a comprehensive epilepsy center apart and what treatment options are available there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Dr. Sharan's kind of slide showed it all. I mean, at a comprehensive epilepsy center that's a level 4, you're going to have all the options available. So you're going to have medical treatments. Typically, you're going to have dietary treatments. You're going to have traditional surgery, minimally invasive surgery, brain stimulators. So you're going to have a whole host of treatment options for you. And it's going to be a center that's working with neurologists like myself who specialize in the treatment of epilepsy, neurosurgeons like Dr. Sharan who specialize in the treatment of epilepsy, but then also the neuropsychologists, the neuroradiologists, even psychiatrists that need it, because sometimes we need our psychiatrists to help us out. And you know what sets the level 4 centers apart from the level 3 centers is, again, the level 4 centers can do everything. And also typically most level 4 centers are also doing the research that's leading to the newest discoveries. And so, you know, we were part of the original trial bringing the RNS device to the market. We were part of the original trial bringing deep brain stimulator to market. That benefits you because when we're doing that research, obviously we get access to technology before it's commercially available for those patients that may need it. But also then when it becomes commercially available, we actually have the experience already because we already participate in the research. And that's also, I think, a very important part that kind of separates out those things.
Yes, thank you so much. And when would you recommend someone goes to a comprehensive center?
Yeah, I mean, so I think as we showed you, the data, once you've failed more than 2 or 3 seizure medicines, meaning that you've been on 2 to 3 medicines that were appropriately picked and it's not working, meaning you're still having seizures, the recommendation both from the American Epilepsy Society, the American Academy of Neurology, and the Epilepsy Foundation is that you should seek out the care of an epilepsy specialist at that point, because you want to do a couple things. One, doctors aren't perfect and we make mistakes. And so maybe we made the wrong diagnosis and we need to reevaluate things to make sure we're treating the correct thing. So you want to make sure, is the diagnosis accurate? Were the medications properly selected? And then if those are both yeses, then say, okay, well, are there any other medical options that we absolutely have to try now? Or do we have to start down this path to look at the other alternatives, including diet therapy and surgeries and the like? So.
Mm-hmm. And then we have one other question that came in. I think it's an important question. Is the RNS only a last resort after failing medications, or when should someone consider RNS or any advanced treatment option?
Want to tackle that, Ash, or do you want me?
Go ahead. I'm actually thinking of the right way, actually, too.
Yeah, so I don't think RNS is not a last resort. I think, you know, once you've failed 2 or 3 medicines in our practice, that's when we pause and we say, okay, this is now meeting the criteria for being considered medically intractable, meaning the medicines are not working. And then we start to explore what options are available for you. I view my job as your epilepsy doctor to make sure that you understand that all the options that are available to you, and then help you pick what's the best treatment for you. Now, if you have medicines are not working and you have a abnormality in the brain that is easily treated with traditional surgery, then we're probably going to recommend traditional surgery because we know that traditional surgery has a much higher track record of rendering people seizure free for long periods of time. But if you, again, have more than 2 spots, or in John's case, an area that was where we couldn't operate, that's when we're going to start talking about these other options, including the brain stimulators.
Thank you so much. I just want to give one more minute if anyone else wanted to ask any additional questions. So we have one final question, and that is, how do you guys as physicians use the data that the RNS system is able to capture?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the, I think the really exciting thing coming out from the RNS data is, one, we can use it when you say you have a seizure, we can then log in on the internet. And I did this just before, just to kind of give John some updated numbers on how many times his device is going off. So I can go on the internet at any point and pick up any of my patients that have the device implanted and see what's going on. I think there's practical uses for that, right? So unfortunately, I had a patient with the RNS device that had a seizure out at a public shopping center, was confused and disoriented afterwards, and somebody called the police, and he ended up he was then got arrested because he wasn't following the police officer's commands because he just had a seizure, and unfortunately had marijuana on him because he isn't part of the medical marijuana program. So the mom called me right away. I was actually able to get them to download the device. I could actually then prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there was a seizure at the exact moment that 2 minutes before he got arrested. And so that's one very unusual example, but you can also say, people have seizures at certain points and certain times. And so we can actually start to understand the cyclical nature of seizures. The device, from a scientific perspective, what we're learning is we can now, with groups, not down to the individual level, but at the group level with some of the data, predict that we know when people are more likely to have seizures at a group level, not at an individual level yet, but we're going to hopefully eventually get there to maybe, if we can figure this out, maybe we can actually start to predict bad seizure days. So if we could get the device eventually sometime in the future to say, hey, today's a bad seizure day. You either need to take an extra dose of medication, or maybe be careful, don't drive today, or maybe don't go to work today. Maybe you need to work from home, or alert a friend or family member to come over. That would give a lot of power back to the person that's living with epilepsy, because one of the scariest things is the unknown, never knowing, when the shoe's going to fall, and that unknown. So that would give some power back. So I think that's some very exciting thing. And I think the other thing that's coming out is, the device reduces seizures, as we talked about. It again, typically doesn't render people seizure free for long periods of time, although some people can gain 6 to 12 months of seizure freedom with the device implanted. But what we can actually do is, and as we adjust medications, we actually can start a medication, and I can then log in a week later, 2 weeks later, and see, is there a reduction in activity on the device? And it's actually been shown that can then predict, when you come back and see me in 3 months, that the medication's actually working. And so that's another way that we can actually use the device to actually enhance how we medically treat somebody when we're adjusting medication. So those are a couple of examples.
Great, thank you so much. And we actually had 2 more questions come in while you were saying that. The first one is, does the RNS system work for insular seizures?
In our practice, I think we have 2 patients who have insular seizures who have RNS devices, and nationwide, the numbers aren't huge yet. So I don't think we have a good idea on what is the probability of us reducing it between 30 to 50, 60, 70%. We think that the RNS is fairly robust and over time gets there because we keep making it smarter. But I think it's too soon. We don't have enough data points to effectively answer that question right now.
Sure. And are any patients with temporal lobectomy, can they also get the RNS system?
Yeah, in fact, it's fairly commonly used for patients if they have further seizures after temporal lobectomy, especially on the left side. The left side is responsible for a lot of speech and a lot of memory. And so that has to be taken into account, that if you try to do more surgery for that, would you adversely affect those functioning? And so for those patients, it's actually probably the better choice.
Great, thank you guys so much.
All right, well, I guess we will wrap up. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rena Laughlin, and I'm the program director for the Epilepsy Foundation Eastern Pennsylvania. I'd like to thank all of you out there for attending. Thank you to our wonderful doctors, Dr. Ashwini Sharan and Dr. Chris Skidmore, John, our patient advocate, Heidi Glasser and Emily Pigeon from NeuroPace, and our EFUPA president and CEO, Missy Dalloway. We at the EFEPA would love to stay connected with all of you, so please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check out our website at www.efepa.org. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank you,
Thank
John.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you, John.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye. Bye, doctor.